right, hello there. So this is my presentation for my fourth grade math unit plan upgrade. I went ahead and chose the curriculum that was provided, being that my mentor teacher does not use a curriculum book. We actually use the Writing Revolution, which is just like a textbook that we pull examples and things from, that they are actually working on creating a framework for the 7th grade class that I'm in currently. But needless to say, I chose math for this assignment, which was a little challenging for me because math is not my strong suit, but it was fun because I was able to kind of think outside of the box and push myself as far as my creativity for lesson planning. So with that being said, I will go ahead and speak on my first lesson. So this was the fractions of an area, halves, fourths, and eighths. The standards are listed on the screen. Those were provided in the curriculum. So this lesson would focus on introducing halves, fourths, and how to find fourths, and eighths. And with this lesson, after the teacher-led instruction is provided, the students will jump into an activity using interactive games on Splash Learn. And that would be a great way for the students to just kind of get interested in the material and familiarize themselves with it, just so before we move on to the next lesson, they've had a chance to really explore the content. And a great way to use that or get used to the content would be to just kind of play with it and have fun and get used to practicing what they just learned. And so I found the website splashlearn.com. So they'd be able to use they've got about, I believe it's like 70 different games available that the students could play. So those could be provided for the students to work on a specific, maybe a couple different options for them that they can choose to play on. And then after that, the class will move into a discussion about fractions and equivalent fractions to 1/2. And so that'll kind of wrap up with their practice for the day. As far as the Sammer model, I felt like this kind of fell on the augmentation spot on the model, just because it's definitely different than working with their whiteboards, but it hasn't really redefined the lesson or made them think creatively in a different way. It's just you're using the technology to provide the information differently to the students, and they are able to use the technology to answer or solve the problems. So for lesson number 2, this was fractions of an area, thirds and sixths. Standards are stated. The lesson would be for the teacher to lead the classroom by using different examples and manipulatives. They will explain different parts of fractions, explaining that the parts of a whole, and then they'll kind of build on that lesson, the lesson number 1, the previous lesson. And then this time, so they'll continue to talk about fractions, but they'll add in thirds and sixths. They'll be able to compare the fractions with another. And then this will be more focused on practice. Sorry, I apologize. So this lesson was actually kind of interesting. I had found an article online that compared fractions to music notes and how different times in music, they're all very based in fractions. And so I found kind of a rough lesson that I pulled from for this second lesson to get the students thinking differently about math and fractions. I thought that this would be a great way for students to really think outside of the box, especially for students who maybe aren't math-minded, but maybe they're more musically inclined. I know in school that was definitely the case for me. I was really good at music, and I totally understood time and beats and measures, but I never really made that connection until I read this in the article that you have, whole notes, half notes, 18th notes, eighth notes. And so it's one beat from, or one note per that many beats. And so it's broken up into fractions. And so I thought that this would be a great way to explain fractions to students in a different way than they might be used to or have heard of fractions before. And this would, the project behind this would be just basically creating that on the computer and creating a representation of that on the computer using different aspects of technology. I thought that this would be under augmentation as well, just because, again, it's kind of providing the information to students and allowing them to use the technology to show their understanding, but it's not, the technology isn't changing or helping to elaborate their understanding. They're just using it as a means to express themselves or express their understanding of the content. So same parts, different wholes was lesson number 3. This lesson was to have the students review what they learned in previous lessons. After each class solves a few of the problems together based on memory. They'll work on the next activity. This one, the class will be split into small groups. Some will work on a worksheet, another will play a math game, and then the last will work on fraction pies. And so fraction pies was something I found online that was, you can have a 3D printer in the classroom and creating fraction pies. So that's just a whole, and the 3D printer would cut out the actual fractions in order to put them all together, creating the whole circle. And so this might be fun for students to kind of create their own fractions as to create the whole piece. And so they would be able to create, a fourth or a third, a half, and they would have that creativity to be able to plan out what kind of fractions they want to create, actually use the 3D printer with the help of the teacher to create the pieces. And then after that, they'll be able to use the printed pieces to practice their understanding. And my idea was to use the worksheet to have some provided, and the worksheet could be online on the computer, but it would have some correlating kind of problems to go with the fraction pie activity. So I thought that would be really fun for students because it's definitely a different take on using fractions as far as they get to work with their hands and with the technology of learning how to use a 3D printer and how to apply what they've created. So it's kind of the full circle of, switching up the lesson, which I thought really made sense as far as redefining the lesson. So that's where I put it on the SAMR model. For lesson 4, this would be continued practice moving into the decimals. This one would be in the form of a QR code scavenger hunt. I thought it would be fun for the students to be able to go to different places in the classroom and have different problems on at each different station within the classroom. This would be fun for them to practice their place values, which they learned previously in earlier lessons. It's just kind of a refresher, but building on that and really working into decimals and understanding the parts of the whole. This one I mentioned would be fun to do every now and then, but I do think that it might get kind of old for students if it's used repeatedly. But I felt like it would kind of fit on the substitution slash augmentation kind of on the model, the SAMR model. just because you're using the QR code to find the actual problem and then doing the math in your head. You're not, the students aren't actually creating anything. It's more just a means of transporting that information or sharing that information so that they can solve the problem. And then the last lesson, lesson number 5, is the equivalent fraction and decimals topic for the day, lesson for the day. And so this one was focusing on what we know about fractions and decimals as a class. Again, touching on place value and understanding parts of a whole. This one would be to kind of wrap up our thoughts on the lessons that we had previously learned. They would be asked to use their whiteboard tool on the computer and record themselves explaining some different problems that are provided by the teacher. So they're not only writing out the equation, they are expressing their understanding of the content. And this would be a really great way for the educator to kind of fit in that summative assessment, because it really shows whether they understood the content. And this, like I said, this is the wrap up of the unit. So it'd be kind of a great place to put a period mark on what they know and what their understanding before we move on. And so the teacher can kind of assess where they're at and what needs to maybe be reviewed before they move on, or if they can just move on. I thought that this would fit as far as like modification, because they are able to show their understanding. They're using the technology to do that, and interacting with the technology, not just using the technology as a means of sharing the information or passing that information to the student. They are actually having to work at it and express their understanding through the use of the technology. So that's kind of where I put this one at. And so that was lesson number 5. So again, I did enjoy coming up with different examples. It was kind of challenging for me, just because I have, I just ended it, sorry. I don't have the best experience, I guess, or just I haven't been in a classroom to experience math as much in either of my practicums. And so I'm not as familiar with a lot of the activities and things, but just with doing some research and kind of just being creative with it, I did come up with what I felt were some pretty cool ideas, or at least different from the typical. And so I try to hit every aspect or every category on the SAMR model to be able to have a very thorough or cohesive or complete, I guess is the word I'm looking for, complete package as far as the unit, so that we hit all of those different categories. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed my presentation, and thanks for watching. And I'm going to go ahead and stop share, and have a great day.